I'm with Aura, and today I'm guessing people's passwords in 8 seconds or less. It looks like your password is...
Today I'm covering best controller setting practices as well as how to find the perfect sensitivity for you. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. If you're brand new, want to find your way back, double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. So obviously the input device is going to be a controller. I do have a standard default PS4 controller. If you use whatever other controller, you might have to tweak stuff based off feel, but this is the controller I use, and I do have back pedals which are attachable through Sony, and you're able to get those pretty affordable if that's something you're interested in to kind of help out with your ergonomics of your mobility, because a lot of times people do play claw. That's just not comfortable for someone like me, so I've never really played that way. So overall, the button layout, I use default. A lot of people use tactical, and that allows you to drop shot with your right analog stick, or melee with circle, or whatever the case is, or B if you're on Xbox. I normally use default because I normally slide and jump with my back pedals, so I usually only use my right analog stick to aim and where I'm going to put my crosshairs. I use flipped because with semi-automatic weapons, I find it a little bit more ergonomic to be able to spam the R1, L1, LB, RB versus actually spamming the triggers. But if you have digital tap triggers, which are available to people, you can go that route as well, and then it makes no difference. But I just find it a little bit more ergonomical, and then I usually throw my tacticals and lethals with L2 and R2. That one is more specifically preference, but that's why I use it for the spammable weapons, even though you can still spam pretty fast with triggers. It just really depends on where you're at. Stick layouts default. Invert vertical look, I have that disabled. And then here's one we'll go ahead and show in game when we get to it. But the stick drift is highly dependent on your controller. If you get a brand new controller out of the box, your stick drift is probably going to be 0, 1, 2. If you have a true, like if you've been playing with the controller for a long time, over time, the stick drift will tend to increase, and you'll have to increase it. Once you get to about 10, 12, it's probably time to try and find a new controller, because that's going to be at a detriment. Less so on the left analog stick, because more movement, it could be a little bit loose, not a problem. But when you start getting into your aim, any micro adjustments, you have to move more, which causes issues when aiming. So I normally have mine really low because I still have a relatively new controller, and you'll be able to spot that in game. If you just set your controller down, starts moving on its own, you might need to raise those up, and that's pretty much how that part works. So normally I have those set to as low as they can without stick drift, and then the actual upper dead zone, I have those set to 99. I don't really notice the difference between 99 and 100, so I've just kind of left that one defaulted. Horizontal and vertical sensitivity, you can kind of go based off preference. I personally use a control freak, which is a thumbstick on top, as well as precision rings, which go under that. When I kind of show off the progression I've had through just playtime, as well as having the right sensitivity set up with the precision ring, as well as the taller control stick on my right analog stick for aiming. Obviously, during season 2s where I had a decent amount of playtime, and as we continue to go around, my KD and my overall stats have improved over time, and that is a huge result of being able to hit my shots. And obviously, there's a lot of factors that go into winning gunfights in Warzone, whether it's reaction time, positioning, but being able to hit your shots is probably one of the #1 reasons you will lose or win a gunfight. And I've been a partner with Control Freak for quite a while, so if you're looking to get good and get some for yourself, there is a link near the top of the description. Let's get back into it. And as we've seen in previous testing, your FOV also plays into this. The higher your FOV, the higher sensitivity will feel. So for example, if you're playing on 120 FOV versus 80, your 6 sensitivity on 80 will feel significantly slower than it does on 120. So you might need to lower it if you're raising your FOV to compensate for that. But obviously that is something you get a little bit of a feel for. We'll talk about how to find that right sensitivity a little in just a little bit. ADS Sense Multiplier, and this is something that has been really cool that they added. Normally you just leave that at 1, and then you can customize sensitivity per zoom. This is one of the biggest things I was looking for quite a while. I'm glad they finally introduced this with Vanguard, because what would happen is if you guys ever used floor loot, which we're accustomed to using now, a lot of times meta weapons you usually use a 3x optic or lower, 4x in some scenarios, but in general you're using 3x and below. And before they had low zoom, which is 3.25 and below, I believe, and then everything above that was considered high zoom. So if you ran a 4x optic, your sensitivity was not your low zoom optic, it was your above, your higher zoom optic. So now it allows you to adjust it based off your individual optic preference. So if you find yourself on regular weapons using a 4x optic or whatever, maybe a 4x flipped, then you can go with that. And then all of these could be like your sniper optics that you would use for a longer range, which tend to move a little bit slower as it is. So then you could adjust those independently based on feel. I normally rock a 0.75 based off of this setting, but those go hand in hand. If you play with the ridiculously high one, you'll be able to move around, all that stuff, but then once you actually get in a gunfight, you might want it to slow down, and you can lower this dramatically. The key is that as long as your centering is on point, you'll be able to maximize your gunfight. So you really only want to put your your stick sensitivities as high as they can go without impacting your centering or your crosshair placement around the map. If you start running into walls or you end up failing there, but you still have good aim on there, that little bit of adjustment you're doing while centering could cause you to lose gunfights. So you really want to fine tune those, dial those in. Multiplayer is a little bit better of a spot. Plunder's great to kind of get those reps in, but overall you don't want to be kind of like flip-flopping your settings all the time. You kind of just want to find what works, stick to it for a while, and then maybe make some micro adjustments as time goes on, and you have a better understanding of when you're winning and losing gunfights as a result of bad aim. So aim response curve is dynamic. We've gone through these in the past. Typically, most players, or at least the top players, are going with dynamic. Standard's kind of what COD was always on. Linear, other games have had. So it does come down to preference 100% on this, but a lot of times you can, this will impact what sensitivity you might want to change your stuff to too. So I would kind of stick with one and then adjust your sensitivities based off that. Instead of finding the sensitivity and then bouncing around on that, it'll feel real wonky because the response curves are completely different. None of them are bad. I'll tell you that. It's just as long as you're able to hear your shots, that is the goal. And then we have vibration off, aim assist standard. A lot of times precision and focusing could be much more powerful, but there's no rotational aim assist, and rotational aim assist is a huge part of controller aim assist that helps in so many gunfights and is kind of the broken part. So typically that's why you stick with standard. Scale aim assist with FOV. This one provides different pros and cons. I've explained both. I still prefer disabled because it makes the bubble a little bit smaller and I feel like I have good control of where the player's at. Even though enabled might be a little stickier, you do have to get much closer to the target before the aim assist starts to kick in. So again, it comes down to preference. Weapon mounting input, you could change that. Weapon mount movement, exit, I have it enabled. Aim down sight, I have it to hold. Some people use toggle. That seems foreign to me. Steady aim behavior hold, equipment behavior hold, use reload behavior, which is contextual tap. And that's how you just loot faster. You go up to a box, you tap square. You do anything, you jump in a vehicle, tap square. If you need to reload, you just hold it, making sure you're holding it. And that can get you in trouble in multiplayer where you end up picking up random weapons, but in Warzone, not as much of an issue. Depleted ammo switch enabled. Apply all is now in the basic settings, so you can do that. Movement, tap to slide, and that's what you help with the slide canceling. Again, I use paddles, so I just basically tapping the back buttons. There are other elements to get fancy slide cancels in there to min-max them, but overall, generic slide cancel works fine for the vast majority of players. Auto move, I do not have that on. Tactical sprint is double tap and then auto tac sprint, so I don't actually have to tac sprint. I have automatic tac sprint in Warzone because the TTKs are generally more forgiving and you're not going to wear out your controller versus in multiplayer. TTKs are way too fast, you get instantly deleted. Vehicle camera, recenter, and then I have that enabled, and then parachute auto deploy, I have that off. Especially if you're trying to fight to the ground, a lot of times the parachute will deploy way above the ground, and then you have to break it and then open it again or whatever, and then go through that process. So it just slows you down. If you're trying to get to the ground as fast as possible, you got to disable that. Feel like you're splatting the ground too much, you might want to leave that enabled. So now let's get in game and I'll talk a little bit about finding the right sensitivity. We'll go ahead and start off with dead zone, and what I'm going to do is put this down to 0 for both my movement as well as my sensitivity. You can see that it is a little bit moving. You can see the crosshairs are moving slightly. If we go to the mini map, we can see the same issue here. We'll go ahead and try and stop it, but there is a little bit of stick drift, and that's inherent. That's why like almost never you're going to go ahead and put it to 0. The movement, not really too much. I don't even notice it there. But we go ahead and put this to 2.
Thread Beast.
Thread Beast.
Thread Beast is a men's clothing subscription company that sends the latest streetwear to your house every single month. Ooh, and this box got weight to it, meaning it's a lot of clothes in there. Let's go check it out.
Staple! Oh my...
And it doesn't really move. The crosshairs aren't moving. So 2 is probably good for me. If you need to keep going, that's how that process would work. The other part is your aim. Ideally, this is something I've always struggled with, is just because when I loot, I end up looking down. It's just having the discipline to recenter your crosshairs so that your aim is kind of where an enemy will be. And a lot of times you want it on the overall sight line so that when you aim, you're going to hit chest, get a couple chest shots, and then you get a headshot. So as long as your sensitivity, when you move around, you should be able to control where it's going and should have good control over it. If my sensitivity was a little too high, then what ends up happening is it gets all out of whack. I'd probably be able to adjust and it would probably like look cool and all that stuff. But what ends up happening is then it's a little bit more jerky where I need to like kind of get a hang of it, and it can be a little bit tricky. Control freaks, like I said, and the precision rings do help out quite a bit, so I have a little bit more control over it, but you might find yourself struggling to really have that lined up perfectly. So a lot of times what you need to do is, how can you do it in a way that will allow you to keep that maintained centering on the actual doorway instead of the ground, instead of the side of the door, instead of the left of the door, instead of the top of the door, that you are at the right location so that when you come through, you have really good control. Because ideally, if you wanted to come out and let's say
holding for deployment. Take this time to ready up. Enemy dropping into the AO. Playtime's over. Stand by for deployment to the war zone.
So basically, wherever you want to aim, you want to be able to aim there confidently without aiming down sight. So if I just wanted to aim at this doorway, basically I adjust and I'm there. Boom.
Cash by completing contracts, looting, or eliminating targets.
Hey, anyone need it?
Set a drop point for your team, soldier.
Fuck, this is shit.
bomb zone has faded. Area is clear. Enemy dropping into the AO. Moving. Enemy soldier nearby. Time's up. Objective failed. Watch the sky. Bleeding bad here. Enemy UAV active. Enemy UAV active. Enemy UAV active. Enemy sighted.